Hello! In today's video, I'm going to be going through my thoughts on this, the OM System 150 to 600 millimeters. Now, I got this sent to me by OM around about a month ago now, and I've been putting it through its paces. For some context, I am an OM1 user, and usually I have this beautiful lens, the 300mm f4 prime, stuck to my camera. And whilst I absolutely love that lens, before I moved to Olympus / OM, I was very much a zoom user. And ever since I got this 300mm prime, I have fallen in love with it, but I've always missed the flexibility of having a long telephoto zoom lens. So when I got the chance to test out the 150 to 600, I was very interested to see if this would be a worthwhile addition to my kit bag. As I've already said, I've used this lens for about a month now, and I have to say, overall, I've been very impressed. But that's not to say there aren't shortcomings too. There's a lot of information on this lens and the technical specs online and on other YouTube videos, so I'm not really going to be delving into those. I'm just going to be giving you my honest thoughts from a month using this lens out in the field for wildlife photography. This is a very, very well-built lens. It feels incredibly solid, and it's got a very, very smooth zoom function. And to add to that, the zoom function only takes around a third of a turn to go from zoomed out to fully zoomed in. And I also really like this little nodule here that allows you to go from incredibly smooth to quite a bit tighter. It won't move, but I'll have to turn it, to then being completely locked. As you're probably aware, a 150 to 600mm range on a micro 4/3 camera is the equivalent of a 300 to 1200mm range on a full frame camera. That is simply ridiculous range and gives you an awful lot of flexibility on how you want to frame your shot and being able to get many different shots within seconds of each other. It's also ideal for video work because I can zoom out, set the scene a little bit, and then punch in and get close-ups of my subjects. There's a lot that's been said about the weight of this lens, and yes, in comparison to any other micro 4/3 lens, it is heavier. However, I have never really found it prohibitively so. I'm someone who predominantly handholds. I would only ever really use a tripod as and when the shoot specifically calls for a tripod, and I've only rarely found it to be annoyingly heavy. Probably when I've been stood up and waiting for something to happen with the lens to my eye. So if you are going to stand up waiting in the same position for a long period of time, I would probably recommend using a monopod. But just for the sake of science, here's a video showing you just how long I can keep this up to my eye for. This is a very simple test. As you can see, I'm not exactly in peak physical fitness. I would say I'm bordering on fairly average. So, I think I'm a fair specimen to test how hand-holdable this lens is. All I'm going to be doing is holding it up just like that and timing myself to see how long I can hold it up for like that. We'll do it at 600mm. Let's begin the test. It's starting to burn a little bit now, but still fairly comfortable. Starting to hurt a little bit. Right, that's probably now just gone past the point of feeling comfortable, mostly in my tries and my back. But there you go. Hand holding a lens with an equivalent focal length of 1200 millimeters would previously have been unheard of. But I have been incredibly impressed with the handhold ability of this lens. At both the minimum and maximum zoom range, the image stabilisation on this lens has been pretty much faultless. One thing I would note though is that in particularly windy conditions, it is probably a good idea to remove the lens hood, as this can catch in the wind and cause for a bit more jittery movement with the lens. Coming from the 300mm f4 Pro, my expectations with lens sharpness are particularly high. And I have to say that this lens doesn't disappoint on this front at all. Yes, it's not as sharp as a 300mm lens, but there have only been a few instances where it's not been adequately sharp for my needs. There are two scenarios where the sharpness of this lens could come into question. Now, number one, if you're shooting in darker conditions, you're having to push the ISO up, and that in turn causes the sharpness to decrease. And number two, which is probably one that I think a lot of people will come across, is because of the insane range of this lens, it almost gives you the impression that you can punch into a subject that is miles away and it will be sharp. The problem is, the further the subject is away, the more atmospheric distortion you have to shoot through. So even though, yes, the subject might be quite large in the frame, that's because you're shooting at 1200 millimeters. And I've looked at my photos thinking they were going to be very sharp, taken them back and realized, yeah, there's atmospheric distortion there, and there are slight issues with soft photos. But that is simply physics at play there. There is simply nothing you can do about that. Again, coming from the 300mm, my expectations were incredibly high. And once again, it's probably the same story. It's possibly not quite as fast as the 300, but if you get it in good light, there were absolutely no issues with it whatsoever. There's a chance that it may be slower when you get to lower light conditions, but again, I think that's just due to the higher f-stop that you'll be shooting at, which in turn means that the camera struggles a bit more with trying to catch autofocus. But in most conditions, this lens was perfect. And I even tested it with oncoming puffins. And if you've ever tried to photograph puffins, they are very fast and very erratic flyers. And yeah, absolutely no qualms. Now, this is where the lens struggles. Granted, I have put this lens through its pace in all sorts of different contrasty lighting situations, but I would often find myself having to deal with colour fringing in post-processing. And this has meant adding more time after the shoot when I get back and edit all my photos. And it can be dealt with, it just is a bit of a faff. So it would be by no means a deal breaker for me, but if you're someone that doesn't really like going in and editing your photos, then it's definitely something to note. So would I buy this lens? Well, my main issue with this lens is it simply wouldn't replace my 300mm f4 prime. If I didn't already own that lens, then maybe it would be a different story, but I do. I always used to prefer using zoom lenses, and I do long to have that flexibility again. And with the range of this lens, it is incredibly flexible. However, I've grown used to being able to shoot at an aperture of f4, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to let that go. It is a bit of a conundrum to me because I have genuinely absolutely loved using this lens. But most of the time, I won't be wanting to bring this and this along with me for a shoot, just because it's a lot of bulk and a lot of weight to be bringing with you. It would really have to be one or the other. I also don't currently have £2,500 to spend on a lens that's not going to be my main shooter. That being said, if down the line I were to find one for somewhere between £1,500 to £2,000, then I could very, very well be tempted. So there you have it. There's my review of the OM System 150-600. Now, I know I've said I'm not going to buy it, but OM, if you are watching and you want to let me keep it, then let me know. Unfortunately, I think it's very unlikely that that is going to happen, but gotta try. If you do have any questions on the lens, then by all means, drop me a comment below and I'll be sure to answer if I can. I will be doing more videos based all around Micro Four Thirds, so if that is something that interests you, then please feel free to drop a subscription. But for now, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!